Victoria's.
Right.
I'll stay on board. I won't leave the meeting. We're going to have an evening of seeing the transformation of Victoria's garden, which is going to be really interesting, and also the wildlife in that Victoria's had come to her garden since the change. So I'm really looking forward to it. I've seen a lot of it in progression over the years, but it'd be really cool to see it in the photos and that. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I'll read the land acknowledgement, that we acknowledge that the Burke Mountain Naturalists conduct their meetings and activities on the unceded core traditional territory of the Coquitlam First Nation, as well as the shared traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Musqueam, and Squamish First Nations. We thank the people who continue to live on these lands and care for them. And anybody has any questions ahead of time? So if you want to turn your mics off, you can and your cameras while Victoria does the presentation. But if you want to, you'll take questions during the presentation. Will you,
Sure,
Victoria?
whatever. Yep.
Okay, so
whatever.
So if you have a question and your mic is turned off, you can just push your space bar and talk while you're holding your space bar down. So I think with saying that,
Okay.
I'll now turn it over to Victoria.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ian. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And I'll start sharing the screen then. And can people see that?
Now we can.
Okay. And I'm just going to do something.
February 6th, 2019.
I know.
I'm going back in time.
There's the point of this though. Okay. So I'm just getting things set up here. I'm trying something a little fancy tonight. If it works, you won't know I'm doing it. If it doesn't work, well, I don't know what we'll do. Okay. So yes, so here's my title slide. And I've given this talk actually a few times to various garden clubs, most recently February in 2019, although it seems like it couldn't possibly be that long ago. But I've trimmed it and modified it a bit for tonight. And the reason is that my primary reason that I want to share this with you is in the hope that it provides a spark to someone else to do a garden makeover of this sort. It was, funnily enough, the spark for me to get going on this process was a few slides shown at a BMN meeting by David Mountainay. And I'll explain this a little bit further later on. So I'm going to start with this slide, and I show it for two reasons. First is that when you see kind of a fuzzy, poor quality shot like this, the photo credit is to me. The second reason for showing it, though, and the more important reason, is that this little bird made my garden famous amongst birders for the winter of 2017-2018. This is a Rufus Hummingbird that spent the entire winter in my garden. So here's a much better photograph of the bird taken by fellow BMN member and excellent photographer Hilary McGuire. And I don't know whether Hilary's on the call or not, but she has very kindly provided me with photos over the years and has been a great help. And today happens to be her birthday. So happy birthday, Hilary, if you ever watch the YouTube video of this. And Hilary's caption for this photo was a hummingbird that prefers Port Moody to Mexico, because this is the first record of a Rufus hummingbird that overwintered in Metro Vancouver. And I don't think that record has been beat yet. I put the bird on the rare bird alert, and it attracted a number of really keen birders with their big scopes and cameras and everything. So it was a lot of fun. Also had a very excited guy who was visiting Vancouver from Manitoba, and he never expected to get a Rufus hummingbird on his birding list at that time of year. This is another shot of Hilary's. It's the male Rufus hummingbird. And these birds usually arrive in our area from down around Mexico in March, early March. They'll be arriving any day now, and they leave in August. So we don't have them over the winter. What we do have year round now, as everybody on this call probably knows, are the Anna's hummingbirds. So they're present all year round, all throughout the winter. But this is relatively new. We, BMN, Burke Mountain Naturalists, have been doing Christmas bird counts since well before 1995. And it wasn't until 2008 that we recorded our first Anna's hummingbird. And the numbers of this species have just been increasing exponentially since then, as they've been extending their range northward. But I've had other interesting birds in the backyard. Does anyone know what this is? Well, I think I give it in the slide, don't I? This is a California scrub jay. And this is a pretty unusual bird to get around here. In fact, I had it 2 springs in a row. I assume it was the same bird. And this is a bird not of the coast. It's a bird of the dry shrubland areas of California and Mexico. So this was a pretty cool bird. Hillary came over and got some really good shots of it. I've had other birds, evening grosbeaks. They're pretty uncommon birds in my yard, but they're becoming more and more common. And in fact, last summer, evening grosbeaks were out there all over the summer. And I even had some juvenile evening grosbeaks. And this is a picture of a male evening grosbeak feeding 2 juveniles. And in fact, there were 2 sets of offspring last summer. So there was another male elsewhere, had I taken the picture of it, also feeding 2 juveniles. So this indicates, that, of course, that we're breeding locally, which is, I think, pretty cool. Other unusual birds I've had are this common redpoll. It was in with a flock of wintering pine siskins. This is a little wintering finch, pretty uncommon. Not this year. There's been quite a number of them this year, not in my garden though. White-throated sparrows. I get a couple of these a year, usually in the fall. If you're from the other side of the Rockies, you'll be very familiar with this little sparrow. Its song is called, it's really the song of summer on the eastern side of the Rockies, you know, the "Oh, Canada, 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 Canada." And sometimes birds that breed in the northern bits of BC, as we heard from our talk from Liron Gertzman, when they migrate southward, they kind of mess up and come down the west side of the Rockies instead of the east side of the Rockies. So they show up in the Metro Vancouver area occasionally. A few birds every year, but I get them regularly. Not every year, but most years. And I've even had an escaped caged bird. So this is, somebody thought it might be a green canary. I did send it around to the Caged Bird Society of Vancouver, and they thought it was a green canary. They didn't recognize it. And I just snapped this photo through my window and never saw it again. So the question is, what makes my garden attractive to these birds? I've got a list of 74 bird species. Now, admittedly, this number is inflated because I include flyovers. You know, if a Canada goose flies over, I count that as a species. Or a sandhill crane. I actually do have sandhill cranes on my garden list, but they're actually, of course, not really in my garden. You wouldn't get either of those species in your garden. But what makes my garden attractive to birds? Well, undoubtedly, it's location. As they say, location, location, location. But this applies to really to all of us living in the Tri-Cities. We all kind of live on the edge here. You know, it's on the edge of urban development. We've got all this, the mountains to the north of us, no roads, wilderness. Just to show you, I just have to switch here. I don't know whether my pointer is going to work. So this is where we're living. This house is marked by that red dot there, just across from the old Petro-Canada refinery, not an active refinery anymore. We got Burnaby Mountain to the west, which is really good fallout area for migrating birds. But like everybody else in the Tri-Cities, we've got all these green corridors, like along the Chines here, down into Mundy Park, over into Colony Farm, out to the Fraser. And in this direction, Stony Creek, Burnaby Lake, the Brunette, down to the Fraser. And of course, all the wilderness to the north. just get back here, but it's more than location, really. Although it's certainly important. If I lived in downtown Vancouver, there's no way I'd have 74 bird species on my garden list. And what I'm going to share with you are my thoughts on why my little garden appeals to birds and why it appeals to me. I'm going to say at the outset that I'm not an expert. This is a disclaimer. You know, I've certainly read many, many books on how to attract birds to the garden. But at this stage in my kind of garden development, I think I'm at a stage where I don't read the books anymore. I just watch carefully and see what seems to work and what doesn't work. And I think as naturalists, we know that observation is a pretty good teacher. So this presentation is what observing the birds in my garden has taught me. But of course, I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say too, because a lot of you know a lot more than I do about this. So I'm going to start by telling you the story of my garden. And our lot is 60 feet across and 100 feet deep. It was a house built in 1957 in the Glen Eyre area of Port Moody. And this is the house as it was in 2001. And there was a big English holly out the front, and there was what's called, I guess, foundation plantings. And out the back, we had a Japanese maple, an old English hawthorn, and a great big rhododendron. And the house faces north. It's a corner lot, and so it's got this nice wide boulevard, which is great if you don't mind planting on city property. It gives you a lot more scope for what you want to do. And this is the view that I always had rounding the corner to pull into the driveway, looking down this series of usually parched grass lawns, this Burnaby Mountain in the background there. Our lawn was always just buttercup. And for the first 10 years that we were in the house, we used to do what we thought you were supposed to do. You know, we cut the grass, we put lime on it, we probably put moss poison on. We dethatched it. We bought a special attachment for a little lawnmower and dethatched it and had all that huge biomass carted away. And it was an awful lot of work, that lawn, even though it never showed any indication of the work that went into it. But about 10 years ago, I became aware of, it's probably more than 10 years ago now. Yeah, probably, I don't know how many years ago, quite a number of years ago. I became aware of the Bc Naturescape Program, which was a program no longer in effect of the provincial government. And it was a program to encourage homeowners to plant native plants and just to consider wildlife in their plantings. And around that time, and in the years prior to and after, I went on a lot of garden tours, gorgeous naturescape gardens. And of course, you know, I really love them, but they were all a little bit grand. You know, they were big lots and they had streams, and there was a pond over there in the distance and big, mature, big leaf maples. Nothing at all like what I had myself. And I was lucky around this time because I met this guy, Edward Van Veendal, who's a horticulturalist. I actually met him at a Tree Fest event at Riverview, and he had a business of creating and installing this naturescape type garden. His business was called Gardens by Nature. He's no longer living in Ladner. He's moved over to the island. So full disclosure here, Edward is actually the talent, the brains, the creativity behind my garden. But I learned a lot from Edward. And I think with a few things I'm going to tell you tonight, I'm going to pass on what I learned from him. And I think you could do this yourself. You don't have to bring in the professionals, although that is always an option. And you don't have to do it on the scale that I did it either. So these are some of the basic principles that I learned from Edward. And basically the things that appeal to us also appeal to birds. So for example, enclosed sheltered spaces, dense plantings, variety in plant species, variety in heights, variety in blooming times, year-round interest. And what I think is most important is undisturbed areas. And I'm going to be talking a lot about undisturbed areas in the garden. So this is a sketch of how my front garden was at the before Edward in 2001. I don't know whether my cursor is working here. Let me just switch this over. So you see here, can you see my cursor? Go up the driveway.
Yes, we can.
Do a sharp right turn, walk along the sidewalk, do another sharp right turn, go in the front door. And there was this holly here and the Japanese maple out the back. Oops. And this is the sketch of the plan that Edward came up with for the front garden. And so what's different here, I'm having a bit of trouble here. There we go. Is that you see he's gotten rid of all those straight lines. There's still a straight line for the driveway, but that's been softened over the years. So now it was a flat little lawn. So he had the idea of putting some berms in the front and carrying them over across the other side of the driveway and put rocks on either side of the driveway. So there's a feeling of entering the garden. So you come in the driveway and you enter this space here that's sheltered and enclosed. He rejigged the sidewalk so you didn't do these sharp right turns. It's now a smooth, curving path going to the front door. And planted with mostly natives, not slavishly native by a long shot, but a lot of native plantings. And planted for all season interest. One thing that Edward pointed out to me, and I can do the same now, is that you can often tell what season a garden was planted if you neglect this principle of planting for all seasons. For example, if you see a garden that's fabulous in June, but not much to look at the rest of the year, that garden was put in June and the gardener hasn't considered the rest of the year. And this is not a good situation if you want to attract birds and wildlife to your garden, which you want to do year round. You don't want them there just in June. So this is the berms going in. It was just free fill, basically, that I had delivered. It was all done by hand. There were no machines to compact the soil. The berm continued over on the side boulevard. And the plantings going in a very hot summer of 2002.
Question for you, Victoria. Did you pull up the grass before putting the berms down, or did you just cover up the grass?
Well, that's an interesting point. We didn't know. What we did is we went and we raided these big cardboard bins that are behind supermarkets and whatnot, and put them on the grass, and then put topsoil on top of that, and then bark mulch and compost and then bark mulch.
Excellent idea.
So nothing got removed from this yard. Even the sidewalk that was along the front of the house, the great big thick cement blobs that we chopped up from that were saved, and they're used elsewhere, as I'll show you momentarily. And it's the easiest thing to do. A couple of layers of cardboard work, and it decomposes over the years, and much easier than tearing up sod. And so this is the garden in 2011, so 9 years, front garden, 9 years later. And this is what it looked like in 2018, at least the inside of the berm. And the tree in bloom there is a Japanese dogwood, Kusa dogwood. Fantastic tree, lovely berries, great for birds, and pretty showy as well. And this is how the house looked in 2018, more or less how it looks now. And so I'll just get my pointer going here. So here's the original holly. It's actually underplanted with some false lily of the valley. It just grows. I can't say it's underplanted. And so the driveway here, the sidewalk leading around to the front door, and this very lovely, I think, enclosed space in front of the front door, vine maples. This is a catalpa overhanging the driveway, nice feeling of entrance, and still some lawn. So it ties into the neighbor's lawn. Got to get along with the neighbors. This is the side boulevard, the berm, planted in 2002. And this is what it looked like 5 years later. And it's really a hedgerow. It's a corridor for birds. There's always birds going up and down this hedgerow. And again, as you see, there's still some lawn to fit in with the neighboring yards. But by minimizing the lawn, you have this opportunity for larger, at least not large, undisturbed areas for nesting birds and places for birds to escape predators. So I know for sure that there are ground nesting birds like towhees and song sparrows and dark-eyed juncos in these shrubs. So their nesting spots need to be undisturbed. I never enter the garden, really, maybe once or twice a year. And another thing to keep it undisturbed, I just have a push mower, don't use a leaf blower or anything like that, again, in the hopes of minimizing disturbance for ground nesting birds. This is a side boulevard last spring. This really showy tree is not a native tree, of course, it's a double file viburnum. But it's really showy. I've had people standing outside having their pictures taken by it. It's not quite their wedding shots, but it's pretty showy. And Pacific 9 bark, native tree in the background here, also fantastic for attracting insects. And there's red osier dogwood in there, a number of other things in there. I guess another thing I should point out is that most of the work in this garden is keeping the edges straight. That's one thing I have learned, that if you have a lawn and garden, it's really important to keep the edges as sharp as you can. And what I've come to understand is it doesn't matter what kind of mess the garden itself is, or mess in your mind, as long as the edge is sharp with the grass, it looks just fine. So we also redid the back garden too. So we actually did some house renovations in around 2010 and involved an excavation. So there was a pile of earth left out in the back. We put an addition on the house, a small addition on the house, and that necessitated cutting down 2 fairly large trees, Western hemlock and a red cedar. In my defense, I'll quickly add that both these trees had been topped in the past before we owned the house, and were starting to rot. We're certainly not safe trees to have growing right up against the house. But I had the guy, he had them in an excavator and he was about to cart off these 2 stumps. And I said, don't do that, just leave them there. So he scratched his head and dumped them there, and that's where they've stayed. So I had Edward back to do the back garden for me as well. And so he looked at that pile of earth and said, well, there's your berm right there. And he had the idea of putting in a garden path behind the berm. His approach is to not put, some people, I guess, if you have a back garden and a fence, you plant things up against the fence. He says, never do that. Draw things forward. It makes the space look larger. It means you're going to have a bigger garden, a bigger area of undisturbed vegetation, lots of thickets and shrubbery to attract the birds. So these, my pointer's not working, I'm sorry, but anyway, these cement things here around that are shoring up the berm are actually the front sidewalk. We didn't get rid of them. They were just stored in a corner, and certainly had a number of them. And when they poured a sidewalk, in a cement sidewalk in 1957, it was about 10 inches thick, and that's what is shoring up the berm at the back. And then, as I say, there's a path that winds around the back of the berm and comes out at the side. So these repurposed cement blocks are just great because they create all kinds of nooks and crannies for small creatures to, get away from the elements, the rain and the snow and predators and whatever. I've even found a Pacific chorus frog in one of those little crannies there. This is the garden path in a good year. Usually it's impenetrable in the height of summer, but it's actually a very, very nice place to wander around, and because there's always something to look at in a garden like this. You want to have some access to see what's going on. This is the back garden really as it was last summer. So as I say, the same principles. It's sheltered, it's enclosed. The plants are brought forward. They're not just a border up against the fence. And so there's a lot of undisturbed area. This is the same garden, just from another angle. And I go through the garden. I enter the garden really only twice a year. And I do the major cleanup in the spring. Haven't started yet, although I'm just itching to do it, but I know it's too early because there's probably insects nesting in some of the hollow stems that have overwintered out there. If you got dense plantings like this, there are no weeds. You don't have to go out and weed. So at least nothing I would define as a weed. So it's not no maintenance, but it's low maintenance, not no maintenance. Okay, so getting back to birds here. So I've said reason number one why I have so many birds in the garden, the 74 species, was location. The next reason was the really, I think, good garden design. And now what I want to talk a bit about is the actual plantings that supply food for the birds. And I do have a few bird feeders. I have a nectar feeder. I have a feeder for black oil sunflower seeds and suet. But having a bird feeder is kind of good in a way, I think, because it attracts a lot more birds. And perhaps it's something like, duck hunters put out decoys so that, the ducks flying over think, oh, that's a safe place for me too, and they land. There could be something about that. If you have a lot of birds, you're going to get even more birds, or at least that's my thinking on this, or suspicion. But it's not just the feeder that provides food for birds in my garden. I've got the plants really are all chosen to provide something for birds. So berries, one example here is red elderberry, fantastic local shrub to fantastic flowers in the spring, soon coming out for pollinating insects. And then these lovely berries later on in the year. And if you have insects, anything you can do to attract insects to your yard is another great thing, because if you have insects, you're going to have birds, because the birds eat the insects. Another shrub I absolutely love is Saskatoon Berry. I love the flowers in the spring. I've got 6 of these things, just absolutely love them. Very showy flowers in the early spring, and then these berries later on in the season. But of course, they attract bears, because bears just love Saskatoons as well. And whether you can see the bear in the picture on the left, it's over by my neighbor Bob's car there, eating the Saskatoons. Another plant I absolutely love, and you don't very often see in gardens, is tall Oregon grape, or Mahonia aquifolium. And it's a native plant, and it's an absolute bee magnet in the spring. If you go out there, it's just like, you know, that poem, it's a bee loud glade. It's just, you can hardly hear yourself think for all the bees in those flowers. And there's lovely fragrance to the tall Oregon grape as well. And then it's absolutely loaded with berries. All those flowers are create a lot of berries, and they get eaten very, very quickly. So it's really hard to get a photo of the berries on a tall Oregon grape. A non-native plant that I really like is beautyberry, and it's named because it's got these beautiful mauve berries. So it's not native to our area, but I've got it out near the road and have had a lot of questions over the years by people going by, what on earth is that? And now actually I see it all over the neighborhood. A lot of people have seemed to put it in. And these berries are really enjoyed once they dry up by robins and spotted toads and song sparrows and you name it. They're quite prized berries. So later on, usually in the winter after they've dried up a bit. And then in my back garden, this is where I really go. So we talked about berries. This is where I really go for seeds. I love goldenrod, and I'm from Ontario, so I'm used to fields and fields of goldenrod. In my back garden, I don't have to worry about what the neighbors think. So I just let it rip back there. I don't think I've ever deadheaded a flower in my life. I just leave the seeds for the birds. And if you do this, it's actually really interesting, just as goldenrod as an example, not that you deadhead goldenrod. It's interesting the way I talked about garden design, but the plants have design in them too, I think. Once the blooms become really, really heavy with seeds, these long stalks start to bend over gracefully. And now they're accessible for the small ground-feeding, seed-eating birds. So the juncos have arrived back in the fall, and here are these seeds right at beak level for them. It's just, I think it's just wonderful the way things are arranged. Goldenrod is pretty invasive, of course, so you know I have to keep pulling it out, but it's nice. Fantastic for insects, pollinating insects in the summer too. Great for practicing your macro photography. Another plant I love because it's from Ontario, so it's kind of nostalgic, is the Joe Pyeweed, and great for attracting insects. And anyway, as I say, you can attract insects, you can attract birds, and it can grow to be pretty tall too. So it's can be quite an impressive plant. So seeds, there's also plants that provide nectar, which we're just getting into as spring approaches here. So salmonberry, of course, which is native, but there's non-natives like pulmonaria species. Hummingbirds just love the pulmonaria. And red flowering currant, of course, you can't have a garden in the lower mainland, I think, without having the red flowering currant. I was just noticing today that a little bit of red is starting to show on this. Twinberry, black twinberry is another fantastic shrub. Bee balm, Monarda species. It's a hummingbird magnet. Goat's beard, that's the white plumy stuff in this picture. And it's a native that you don't very often see in a garden, but there's just really no reason why not. It's really, really showy. It's a gorgeous plant. And if you look closely, it's just loaded with tiny insects that hummingbirds go to because they require insects for protein, and little warblers and other little, kinglets and whatnot will be in the goat's beard. So it's a great thing to have in your garden. Another plant I love is the native Columbine. And this is something I have to keep reseeding. Planting by seed again and again. It doesn't seem to last for me for some reason. But it's a pretty interesting plant because it is pollinated by hummingbirds. And it has evolved with our hummingbirds. So it's got these long tube, like, I don't know whether I can get this thing working or not.
Try clicking on it, Victoria.
Yeah, as I say, I'm doing something fancy here, Ian. So I think you can see my cursor here. It's got these tubular spurs. These and the nectar's down at here, it's upside down. The nectar's at the top there. And the length of this spur, nectar spur, is just the length of a hummingbird's bill. So it's just absolutely perfect, designed with a hummingbird in mind to be pollinated by a hummingbird. What's interesting and a really good argument for using native plants is this Columbine, because Columbine is a species that's also native to Europe, but it's a different subspecies. So we have Aquilegia formosa, they've got Aquilegia vulgaris. And in Europe, there are no hummingbirds. So their Columbine doesn't have these long nectar spurs that ours does. And so the fit isn't as good for hummingbirds. So we really need to, I think we should try to plant native plants as much as possible, although I don't entirely, as I admit, but if you can, it's not a bad idea. And interestingly, I don't think it's by chance that hummingbird feeders have this very similar, yellow and red color combination.
May I ask where you get the seeds from?
West Coast seeds.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Yep. Another interesting thing, because this plant is pollinated by hummingbirds, and hummingbirds apparently have no sense of smell, this plant has no fragrance. And as it turns out, plants or flowers that have scent are usually pollinated by insects. It's the scent that attracts the insects, but hummingbirds don't have any sense of smell. So plants that are pollinated by hummingbirds are often unscented. So just a little factoid there. I hope it's correct. Also have this old English hawthorn in the back that came with the house, and it's been savaged over the years, and we've lopped off limbs as well. It's absolutely hideous to look at most of the year. Blooms a bit in May, flowers last for a few weeks into June, and then they fall off, and then it's just this skeleton in the backyard. But I would never get rid of it because it's a wonderfully buggy tree, especially in May and June. It produces all these little caterpillars, which is just the time of year when birds like chickadees are feeding their nestlings. And you can imagine what a good meal that little caterpillar would make rather. So insects, and anything you can do to encourage insects. As I say, if you have insects, you're going to have birds feeding on the insects. And the fourth reason, so I've gone location, design, food. The fourth reason is leave it alone. Leave the garden alone. Leave it undisturbed. And I think this is a really important principle to follow if you want to attract birds and wildlife to your garden. I went to a talk by Egan Davis, who runs the UBC Botanical Garden. And this isn't an exact quote, but he said that his ideal garden is one that you can leave on its own for 6 months and it's still thriving upon your return. And that's my ideal garden too. So my garden, I shouldn't say I never watered. Last summer during the heat dome, I did do some spot watering, but never any chemicals. As I say, I go through it once or twice a year and, thin a few things. But really, there's very little other care. And if I disappeared for 6 months, which I might well do, my garden's just going to be fine. The grass, of course, is going to have to be cut. Somebody's going to have to take care of those edges so they're still sharp, so it doesn't look too unkempt. But it could be left alone for 6 months or longer and just be fine. Just on this topic of undisturbed, I said I don't use any loud gas mowers. I use this battery-powered grass strimmer to do these edges. And hopefully these things being quieter cause less disturbance to any of the nesting birds. Another reason why I have a lot of birds in my garden is that I keep my cats inside. So it doesn't seem very ethical to me to attract birds to your garden if you've got free roaming cats. My cats are very valuable cats, as you can tell, highly bred. But if they're kept inside, they're safe. They're safe from cars, from coyotes, from other cats, dogs, and parasites. And we've all heard the statistics. I don't have them at hand, but the bird populations really are plummeting. And the three main reasons in order of importance are habitat loss, climate change, and cats, free roaming cats. So cats have to be kept indoors. In my area, I'm fortunate, in my opinion, that there are very, very few domestic cats outside. And if they are, they're not around for long because we have a lot of coyotes in our neck of the woods. This is a photograph taken by my neighbor, Myra, and this was taken just outside our house, the holly trees on the right, at 3 o'clock one afternoon. We've got other cats in the neighborhood. Another photograph that Myra gave me of a bobcat in her back garden. But just on the topic of cats, one thing you can do this time of year that's actually really fun to do, cats are shedding all over the place, throw the fur out into the garden and just watch it disappear. It will disappear in no time because the birds are looking for nesting material, and there will be more so in a few weeks. And cat fur, and probably dog fur too, is really highly prized for nesting material. So when you open up, if you have a chickadee box, you're going to find a nest that's interwoven with your cat's fur. This nest here in this photograph, unfortunately, wasn't successful, but there's something really pleasing about thinking that your cat's fur is keeping bird nestlings warm and cozy. So why attract birds to the garden? I don't think I have to convince anyone here, but there's a few reasons I had from this talk to the more serious gardeners was bird song. You get lots of bird song. One thing I really like about the garden is when you enter, say, through the back gate, it's this lovely lift of wings as you enter. It's a bird's lift, and then they come back as you sit down again. And it's also a really nice thing to do, I think, is to follow the rhythm of the seasons, not just through the plants in your garden, how they change over the season, but also the arrival and the departure of the birds. So it's more than just the plants. And if you're a data nut like I am, you can really chart the arrival and disappearance of birds. So I've followed the arrival date of the first Rufus Hummingbird at our house every year over the years. And it's they're arriving earlier and earlier. It appears from this chart here. Probably this is because I've gotten better at spotting them. I know when to expect them, so I start watching for them. So with our garden now, we can sit in the living room and see warblers in the vine maples right outside the living room window. And this certainly, we couldn't have done this with the old garden or the old front yard in 2001. And just I want to say that vine maples are just lovely trees to plant in your garden. They're lovely to look at year round. They're not very big trees. In the winter, when the leaves are down, they're very sculptural. And you can see in this photo some of the flowers that vine maples have. You don't often think of them as flowering trees, but they have very beautiful, delicate little flowers that bees and other insects just love. And perhaps that's why the vine maples attract the warblers every year. Last spring, the vine maples were just shaking with warblers, literally one day. It was pretty exciting. And then if you've attracted birds to your garden, you're going to get something that's attracted to those birds. For example, this sharp-shinned hawk, I hope I've identified it correctly. But if you get raptors like this sharp-shin, we get Cooper's hawks and merlins in the garden too. That's really success, a sign of success. This is the food chain in action, and your garden is working the way it's supposed to be working. So this is my summary slide. So what's good for birds is good for us. So which landscape would you want to sit out in and have a cup of tea and chat with a friend? I certainly know which one I want to sit in. So if you want to see my garden sometime, give me a call. Love giving tours. And thank you very much.
Bravo.
Great.
That was great, Victoria.
Oh, thank you.
Great updates. I love it.
Yeah, it's fun. You'd never go back. Never go back. It's just, there's a different sound. The rain makes a different sound out there. We've got these windows that you can open up, and it's just lovely. Would never go back.
Very cool.
And just to mention that Hillary is on the line, and she missed seeing her own beautiful bird photos at the beginning. So,
Hillary, I hope you watched the YouTube video. And thanks very much for providing your photos over the years.
and there was from the chat from John Saremba, a very informative and engaging presentation. So thanks to Victoria.
I often think, wouldn't it be great if all my neighbors did the same thing? If everybody in Glen Eyre did the same thing? What a different world it would be.
Have you noticed some neighbors doing little bits to their garden?
Yes,
Yeah.
but you know what? But the impetus there was the chafer beetle. Chafer beetle's been wonderful for getting people to get off the grass. Yeah.
Was a question from the chat. Do you have a pond in your garden for summer heat?
No, I don't. I really just have a couple of bird baths. I'd love to have a bubbler. Another BMN member, Wendy Snyder, she and her husband have a bubbler in their back garden. I went over to have a look at it and would like to get one. I've just never gotten around to it. It's not a very big garden. The back garden is not very big. There's no room for a pond.
Do you have problems with squirrels? Not the native kind?
Well, I don't know whether you noticed there was a baffle on that one bird feeder there. But now that I've got more overhanging trees, it's becoming more and more of a problem because they can drop down onto the feeder.
Ooh.
I keep a little pile of rocks by the back door. I couldn't hit a squirrel, so don't worry. But you know, I throw rocks at them, and we also have the hose set up so they can be squirted.
Yes, I have a mister. And then I put lemon juice in it once because it didn't seem to be doing much.
So it was motion activated?
No, I go out there and I open the screen door and I tell them to get lost. And sometimes I go out yelling and I squirt them.
Yeah.
I try to squirt their body or whatever so that they get wet, or, you know, if they lick themselves or clean themselves, it's not a good taste. Maybe they won't come back.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is very successful.
Yeah. Well, the bobcats eat the squirrels.
Oh, come on
So-
down. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stacy, did you have a question? Just hit your space bar.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, I know, Victoria, you worked with a landscaper.
I did.
But that person's no longer around. And I'm wondering if there are companies or other people you know in the area that kind of do something similar or tend to focus on that.
I don't know specifically, but I'm sure there are. And I, just because I'm being recorded here, I don't want to say any names, but I could mention a few to you privately. Oh, here, this is coming up. This is one person I would mention, Plan B
Oh,
Nursery.
great.
Yeah.
Thank
Josh
you.
Thompson, he runs Plan B Nursery, and he's actually a director of the Native Bee Society of BC. Nice, very nice young fellow. Yeah, so it is a little bit of a cheat that, you know, I paid for this garden, basically. Well, it's not a cheat, but you know, it worked out well for me. So Ian, do you want to say anything about
What I
what
did?
the inspiration, how my garden was an inspiration for you to do the same, and you did it yourself, and it's
Yeah.
been
It's been interesting because I did it myself. I might have planted some things that were they grew a little bit too big, and so my front yard is quite a jungle. I would say that I have to prune it down every couple of years, but it certainly, you know, my wife and I enjoy it very much. I've got little pathways and berms, and it's very different compared to everybody else on the street. But as Victoria said, you do notice some of your neighbors doing little things to their yards that they look like they've taken it from your yard. So.
Yeah, I have a neighbor down the street, and she admitted to me that she's taken all kinds of cuttings from my yard.
Oh,
So
wow.
I go down and I see, oh yeah, I've got one of those. But yeah, I got it from you, you know.
Wow.
So yeah, it's great. I love it. I love it.
So couple question, or one question it was about I have a lot of Anna's hummingbirds. Will they chase away the Rufus hummingbirds? I've never heard that.
I don't know whether
Like
they're both really aggressive.
yeah, they're very territorial, and
Yeah.
they fight over feeders, but I don't know about any difference between the Annas and the Rufus.
I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know.
Anybody else birder that knows about that?
Oh, here's somebody. They will fight. I've seen them.
Well, certainly will fight, but
Oh, ours fight like cats and dogs. Pardon the pun, but our hummingbirds just, yeah. If it's nearly impossible to see two sitting on the feeder, like they just go at each other.
But the Annas and the Rufus fight each other, Brian?
Even same species.
yeah, I was
Right.
gonna say they all
Yeah.
fight.
Yeah.
Small but feisty.
And here's a I guess a tip in that someone said here that they put olive oil on the shepherd's hook that they hang the bird feeder from, and the squirrels can't climb up it.
Great.
Like the old, you know, greased pole or something like
Yeah.
that. Did someone asked about what your garden looks like in the winter? I don't know if did you.
I didn't have any winter shots, but I should have done that because I
Yeah.
claim it's got year-round interest. And actually, it does have year-round interest. I talked about the vine maples being very sculptural in the winter time. I've got red osier dogwood, lovely red twigs. I've got yellow twig dogwood, and the two together are lovely in a winter garden. I've got something called sweet box. I can't think of the sarcokia or something, the Latin name, but it's something that blooms in January and really, really fragrant in the winter.
And also having ferns that die off, and also having like a deer ferns and sword ferns
lot of sword ferns. Yeah.
that stay green all year.
Yeah. And then I have this great big rhododendron that was put in 1957. I happen to know it's a massive big shrub now. I think you saw a picture of it with the chair underneath it. Edward carved out that spot to put the chair under. I resisted for a long time, and he said, "You'll like it," and I love it. But that big rhodo is fantastic because it's evergreen all year round. You know, the birds, if a hawk or something comes over, they dive in there. There's a lot of duff underneath for birds that scratch the ground, like the varied thrushes in the winter and spotted towies looking for insects.
Also, a question: do you have an Indian plum?
I have several Indian plums. I have both male and female, not by design, but I do have many Indian plums, and they are actually just starting to come up on their own now.
And
they're
they're
in
flower.
bloom.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're flowering in some places.
Yeah.
There's lots of people that said how much they enjoyed your presentation.
Oh, that's nice.
Reading out all those, but
You can start small. I don't know whether Lori Austin's on the call. She and her husband are starting to put in a naturescape garden. They've just expanded a bed in the front, and
yeah, they've been probably 3 years now or something. Like
probably getting bigger every year.
I
found I got more birds now that I've left the leaves on the ground. Oh, I used to rake them up in the fall, and I've noticed more birds again. When I first moved in, we had a huge birch tree with a lot of birds, but it died. And then we didn't have very many, but they're starting to come back.
Yeah. Yeah, leaving the leaves there. As I say, you know, you watch a varied thrush or a spotted towhee, they do this funny little hopping scratch motion looking for insects underneath the duff, as it's called, which is these rotting leaves. No bare earth, never have bare earth. It just dries out. You
Yeah.
never see bare earth in nature.
I also, I rake the leaves from my neighbor's trees off my grass, kind of onto my plants.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I remember reading somewhere that the pounding rain in the winter really can compact the soil. So if you have leaves and other things there to kind of break the fall, and it's a good idea. That was something I never really thought of before. So it looks kind of untidy, and I was wondering if I should just turn them over in the dirt. Anyways, I haven't decided what to do. They're still,
No, leave
sometimes
them
they blow
alone.
around, and I just kind of pile them back up.
Yeah, leave them alone. That's where the queen bumblebees are making their nest underneath those leaves too. Don't touch anything.
No, I got a couple of tulips that are kind of strangled by the leaves, so I just kind of tore them
Oh
apart.
yeah.
Give them a little pep talk.
Yeah.
That was my fun job today.
Well, the chat has gone quiet, but anybody else with some questions? Or has anybody else started a naturescape garden?
I've got a nest box.
That's
Sorry,
how it starts.
what did Brian say?
He's got a nest
I've
box.
got a nest box.
Nest box. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I've had chickadee boxes up in my yard. I think I've got 5 of them, and they've been probably up for 8 years or more.
That's
And this year was really the first year I got something in them. So,
Okay.
you know, it's quite amazing with chickadees that I've know of people that have had, you know, holes and things that you wouldn't have expected, you know, a chickadee to go in and they make a nest, and then there's other people that have nests up for years and they don't get used. So, so sometimes nature will take a while before it decides that it wants that as its home. So
yeah.
because we have chickadees in the yard all the time, but just not nesting. So
I cleaned out a nest box day before, and I'm pretty sure the chickadees, because the hole's small for a chickadee, and it had some wonderful like stuff in there. Like they obviously nested a couple of times because it was nice and thick, but there was also a dead carcass in there for a little chick. And if you would like, I can actually share it. If you like, if someone can identify it, like it's pretty whole, the carcass. Does anyone want to look at it? No? Okay, fine. I'll send it around.
Most people have got their mics off, just so you know.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I'd rather not. I'll send it round to the executive, and maybe someone can identify it. I'm sure Jeff will.
And John Saremba just came in saying, I'm supporting development of a pollinator garden at a school in Coquitlam.
Oh, wow.
Coquitlam. This should be more widespread rather than manicured lawns. And that was for me doing a nature garden. Was the first thing for me was to get rid of the lawn. That was the first thing that I did.
It's so uninteresting in comparison. It's mindless, a lawn. You can just pay somebody to come in and cut it. You don't have to think about it, but it's
it's also usually dandelion farm as well, lawn. So.
Well, dandelion, nothing wrong with dandelions. Dandelions are good for bees, but yeah.
And the other thing is, as you mentioned, how much time people spend in chemicals and everything else trying to get rid of moss. Yeah. You know, I try and tell people that if you do have grass, just let the moss go. You know, don't fight it.
Oh, our lawn, our back lawn has virtually no grass because it's wet all the time, and it's under a big, huge maple tree, so it doesn't get a whole lot of sun. And the moss has simply taken over, and I love it. Like, it's a natural covering. It's soft underfoot. It goes a bit brown in summer, but I think it looks fabulous.
Yeah.
And we had the
Biodiversity.
landscapes come in last week, and they sprayed the damn stuff.
Oh,
dear.
Now it's dead.
now it's brown.
Oh.
Now it's brown.
Yeah.
It'll come back. It'll come back. But I had told them, don't touch unit number 14. Do not do. But they didn't listen.
Right.
Well, sometimes, if you have kids, you want to have a lawn, swing sets and all that kind of stuff. So, there is a place for it. I shouldn't be quite so negative.
No,
Just-
it depends on what you're
like
using
this.
your yard for.
Yeah.
But yeah, a grass lawn is one of the most unnatural things that we can do around our house. It's not normal. We've been conditioned to have one.
Yeah.
That's all. And I'd like to announce, this has nothing to do with Victoria's fabulous presentation, but we have our first international member of BMN. I just gift membership my friends in Tin Can Bay in Queensland. And now, yes, we're an international organisation now.
I'm hoping they don't want a hard copy newsletter.
No, they'll be okay with it.
Don't get me started.
Yes. Boom,
Edie's
boom.
our
Thank you,
treasurer.
Edie.
Yes.
And an excellent treasurer. Just the best. Thank you, Victoria.
The
Fabulous
newsletter eye openers happened in the last couple of months.
Okay, well, if there are any other questions? No, well, I think we'll.
I was
give Vic-
going to
oh.
say, I'd really like to do what Victoria did. And I don't know if I am capable of this, but it would be fun to start it out and put little articles in the newsletter of the progress every month.
Yeah.
Sure, or at the beginning, at the end of the season. Like I went to Planet B and I wanted to buy everything, but I didn't know where I was going to put it. So
Yeah.
I just thought, okay, I'm going for shade. I bought 4 things. They're in the back under the shade, and they're growing. So I'm thinking, okay, next time I go. Plus, I also want to remember what the doodad I planted. Like I've got some kind of ginger, something, onion.
Yeah, wild ginger. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. So hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pollinated
If
by
I go too
spiders.
fast, yeah, it's too much. And I didn't have cardboard. I just had a ton of newspaper. So the grass is, I don't know if my husband's noticing this, slowly receding as I make the garden a little bigger.
Yeah. Husbands are a bit of a problem sometimes with Naturescape gardens.
Hey, steady on.
Hey, sometimes the
Carry
husbands are the
on.
ones that start it.
The motivator, yeah.
Not mine, of course.
We have a lot of biodiversity in our grass, so that's fine by me.
Yeah. I really do think you can just, start in a small way.
Yeah.
Plants are movable. I'm moving things around all the time throwing them out all the time. If the slugs like them, I don't keep them. Out they go into the compost. So
I've met a lot of my neighbors because I just put it at the end of my driveway
I've
write
seen, yeah.
with chalk free, and then it goes.
Yeah, the big thing is, I look at people's yards walking around and people planting, cedars underneath the power lines, or, that you have to think ahead of time of what you're planting and where you're planting it, know how big it's going to get, wide as well as tall, and plant accordingly. So
yeah, and that's actually one thing that a professional can help you with. They're like architects. They can picture things in 3D. They know what this tree is going to look like in 20 years. And they, as you say, they know how big the crown's going to be. And that kind of advice is pretty useful, but you can still just go with vine maples. They don't grow very big. And if you mess up, you take it out. Start with something else. Put in Saskatoon berries. Some mahonia.
And also I found I bought a lot of plants, native plants or like from UBC Botanical Gardens, and they don't always survive. They might last for a year or two, but
Yeah.
you are going to get what you think would be really cool plants to have, but it doesn't always work out.
Yep, that's gardening in a nutshell. I've killed
Yeah.
more connect than.
No.
Yeah. Well, salal. I used to have trouble getting
Oh.
salal going, and it's like 3 or 4 feet high now.
Yeah.
It's fabulous. You have to be patient too.
Yeah, the one that I actually found so interesting is sword ferns. In sword ferns, you'll be out in the forest and you'll see basically a sea of sword ferns, and you think that it must spread so fast. But
Yeah.
I've had sword ferns planted for over 15 years, and there's been very few sort of new ones pop up. So for whatever reason, they don't seem to spread as fast as you would think they would when you see it in the forest, which is a good thing. Not sure what that was about.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I think mention our next meeting will be our April monthly meeting, and along similar lines, we have a native bee identification workshop presented by, and maybe Victoria can help me on this, Murtika Ale. Is that
Marika Ale.
okay? Thank you.
Hmm.
So saying that, unless there's anything else, we will bring the meeting to an end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining in. Thanks for
I
joining
see
in.
Stacy's
Enjoyed
got
it.
an extra hand.
Put it on.
Hey, good to see you, Daryl.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
It was.
You-
It was.
Great. Glad you enjoyed it. Bye for
Great.
now.
Thanks so much,
Thanks, guys.
Victoria.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, did you want to save the chat, Victoria?
I just did.
Okay.
Thanks, Ian.
Very
And-
enjoyable. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. And thanks for recording it, Brian.
You're welcome. Welcome. I'll have it uploaded tomorrow. So,
Okay.
Okay.
Cheerio.
good night, guys.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.